Look, I need to tell you something that most people missed this week, because they were too busy scrolling through nonsense. 3 explosions happened in America. Not literal bombs, but political detonations that are going to reshape this country whether you're ready or not. First, DHS launched one of the most aggressive immigration sweeps in years, and they did it in a city nobody expected. Second, Marjorie Taylor Greene, yes, that MTG, went on CNN and apologized. If that doesn't shock you, you're not paying attention. And third, Chicago just became the first major American city where working-class families literally burned their tax bills in the streets. They saw something completely different. One bakery owner shut down his entire business, not because of crime, not because of slow sales, because he was terrified his customers would be swept up in what he called indiscriminate raids. He watched agents throw people to the ground without explanation, and suddenly nobody felt safe anymore. But what DHS didn't mention is about to blow this whole thing wide open. Here's the contradiction that nobody in the media wants to talk about. CNN ran a whole segment questioning why Charlotte was even targeted in the first place. Their argument: crime is down. Way down. Homicides, robberies, vehicle thefts, assaults, all dropping by double digits compared to last year. So if crime is falling, why does the city suddenly need federal intervention? Sounds reasonable, right? Except here's what they conveniently left out. Yes, crime dropped slightly year over year, but zoom out just a little bit. Go back 5 years before the pandemic, before the protests, before the policy shifts, and you'll see that Charlotte's crime rates had spiked dramatically. Property crime up significantly, vehicle thefts more than doubled, burglaries, assaults, arson, all climbing steadily. So sure, things improved slightly from the absolute chaos of recent years, but Charlotte was still dealing with elevated crime levels that didn't exist half a decade ago. And the types of crimes being committed: organized theft rings, gang activity, drug trafficking networks, the kind of crime that brings in federal agencies when local resources are overwhelmed. But here's the part that's about to make this whole situation explode. Because the crime stats are only half the story. Remember that detail about who is actually being targeted. Keep that in mind, because what I'm about to show you next changes everything. Let me give you the data they're not showing on cable news. Charlotte's population has transformed over the last decade. It became a destination for immigrants, some legal, some not, seeking work and opportunity, not metaphorically, actually burned them, like the Boston Tea Party. But in 2025, and as the city diversified, the challenges multiplied, schools had to adapt, social services stretched thin, and yes, inevitably some portion of criminal activity involved people who were in the country unlawfully. That's not controversial, that's just math. When you have a large undocumented population, statistically, some percentage will commit crimes. The question isn't whether that's true, the question is what you do about it. And this is where America splits into 2 completely irreconcilable camps. One side says enforce immigration laws. If you're here illegally and commit a crime, you get deported. That's not cruelty, that's consequences. The other side says targeting vulnerable communities creates fear that prevents people from reporting crimes, cooperating with police, integrating into society. That makes everyone less safe. Both arguments have merit. Both ignore the human beings caught in the middle. The bakery owner protecting his customers, the families hiding in their homes. Most of them weren't activists or criminals, they were just people trying to live, caught in a system so polarized that nobody can agree on basic facts anymore. But here's what nobody expected. The political earthquake that came next made Charlotte look like a warm-up act. While Charlotte was dealing with federal agents in the streets, Washington was tearing itself apart from the inside. Congress had just narrowly avoided a government shutdown, one of those down-to-the-wire negotiations where everyone claims victory and nobody actually wins. A handful of Senate Democrats broke ranks and voted with Republicans to keep the government open. Pragmatic, reasonable, the kind of compromise that used to happen all the time. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wasn't having it. She came out swinging, accusing those Democrats of showing weakness. She said Republicans were learning that if they just inflict enough pain on working people, Democrats will fold. She argued that caving on the shutdown signaled to the opposition that hostage-taking works. It was vintage AOC, defiant, uncompromising, focused on the bigger ideological war. Now here's what nobody is connecting. These 3 events aren't random, they're symptoms of the same disease. A system that's collapsing under its own weight, taking ordinary people down with it. And if you think this is just about Charlotte, or Washington, or Chicago, and then Senator Tim Kaine fired back publicly, he pointed out that he represents hundreds of thousands of federal workers who would have missed paychecks if the government stayed closed. Real people, not abstract political principles. And in a barely veiled jab at AOC, he said some folks might think protecting those workers is nothing, but Virginians sure didn't see it that way. This is the Democratic Party eating itself alive on live television. If you've made it this far, hit subscribe, main, because what I'm about to reveal about MTG's apology will rewrite everything you think you know about this moment. And then the unthinkable happened. Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of Trump's most loyal soldiers, someone who stood by him through every scandal, every legal battle, every controversy, sat down on CNN and did something nobody saw coming. She apologized. Not a little "sorry if I offended anyone" apology. A full scripted moment where she talked about ending toxic politics, stopping divisive rhetoric, healing the country. If that alone didn't break your brain, wait for this. She then accused President Trump of calling her a traitor. She said his language could radicalize people against her and put her life in danger. Let that sink in. MTG, the MAGA firebrand, publicly accusing Trump of endangering her safety. The CNN host looked stunned. Political insiders on both sides scrambled to figure out what it meant. Was this genuine self-reflection, strategic repositioning before her next election? Or was she reacting to being sidelined, losing influence, realizing the movement was leaving her behind? But here's where it gets wild, because MTG didn't stop there. She immediately pivoted to the Epstein files. She said powerful people were being protected, that Americans deserve transparency, that she wasn't going to apologize for demanding the truth. Brilliant move, actually. Whether you agree with her or not, she just shifted the entire conversation. And what she said next ignited a firestorm that's still burning. Here's where MTG crossed a line that nobody expected, even by her standards. She started asking, on live national television, whether a foreign government might be pressuring Trump to keep the Epstein files sealed. And then she showed a graphic on screen, a chart detailing donations from IPAC, the pro-Israel lobbying group, to various congressional candidates. The CNN host's jaw practically hit the floor. You're missing the bigger picture. Because what's happening right now is the early tremor before the earthquake. She pushed back hard. Are you saying Israel is controlling the president? Are you accusing a foreign government of covering up the Epstein scandal? What evidence do you have? MTG tried to backpedal, said she was just asking questions, that it could be any foreign government, that people deserve transparency about who's influencing American policy, but the implication was crystal clear. Now look, criticizing Israeli government policy or lobbying influence or foreign aid, that's all fair game in a democracy, but the way she framed it, the specific connections she drew, tapped into old ugly conspiracy theories that have caused real harm throughout history. You can demand transparency about Epstein's associates without implying a shadowy foreign power is pulling strings. You can question lobbying influence without singling out one country in a way that echoes dangerous tropes. And political analysts across the spectrum said the same thing. If you're going to make that accusation, say it clearly and back it up with evidence. Don't hint, don't insinuate. But while Washington fought over words and implications, Chicago was fighting over something far more visceral, survival itself. Chicago just became the first domino to fall, and nobody's ready for what comes next. Property taxes didn't rise by 5% or 10% or even 30%. In some neighborhoods, they doubled overnight. In North Lawndale, a historically black neighborhood on the west side, average property tax bills jumped close to 100%. In West Garfield Park, increases hit 130% or more. These aren't wealthy suburbs, these are communities that have struggled for decades with disinvestment and neglect. And just as some stabilization was starting to happen, the city buried them with tax bills that families simply cannot afford. Think about what that means in real terms. You're a homeowner living on Social Security, maybe a small pension. You've been paying your taxes, maintaining your property, trying to build equity. Then overnight your bill doubles. You're suddenly choosing between keeping your home and paying for medicine, between property taxes and groceries, between staying in the neighborhood where you raised your kids and losing everything. And over the weekend, residents organized something extraordinary, a property tax bonfire, a modern Boston Tea Party, and I'm going to show you exactly why. If you want to understand what's really going on while everyone else is distracted, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. They gathered at a church, brought their tax bills, and literally burned them in protest, not because they won't pay minors, most will, somehow, but to send a message: we see what you're doing, and we won't stay quiet. And what happened when Mayor Brandon Johnson showed up to face them is about to expose the real reason this is happening. Capítulo 9. Mayor Brandon Johnson blamed budget deficits and necessary adjustments. But here's what he didn't mention. Chicago Public Schools, the same district claiming to be broke, spent millions on international luxury trips. Egypt, Finland, South Africa, hot air balloon rides, safaris, conferences in Las Vegas, first-class hotels, zero oversight. An inspector general report exposed everything. While kids can't read at grade level, while buildings fall apart, the city was funding vacations for administrators. And here's the kicker. The city paid Ernst & Young millions to analyze the budget and offer solutions. The result? A report showing Chicago could save up to $1.5 billion through simple reforms, reduce government vehicle fleets, consolidate real estate, reform bloated contracts, eliminate redundant programs. If Johnson followed those recommendations, the deficit could vanish, Chicago could go from debt to surplus, but he rejected almost all of it. Why? Because real cuts require confronting political allies, unions, bureaucracies, who expect endless funding. So instead of fixing the system, he took from the only group with no protection, homeowners. And when Johnson showed up at a community event last week, a conference about racism and white supremacy, residents shouted him down. One woman stepped up and said, "The white man you call racist is the one standing with us right now." That line went viral because it revealed the truth minus identity politics collapses the moment real life hits your wallet. And what this means for every American city is something you need to hear right now. Let's start with Charlotte, because this is where the federal government just drew a line in the sand. Over the weekend, DHS agents descended on Charlotte, North Carolina, not with a press release, not with a warning, just showed up with tactical gear, unmarked vehicles, and took nearly 100 people into custody in a matter of hours. Now, Charlotte isn't a border town. So let me connect the dots for you, because this is the part the media will never say out loud. Charlotte, MTG's meltdown, and Chicago burning tax bills, these aren't separate stories, they're all symptoms of the same systemic failure. A government that spends recklessly, punishes taxpayers, and collapses neighborhoods while pretending everything's fine. Charlotte showed us that federal enforcement is back with force, and cities with progressive leadership and massive undocumented populations are next in line. MTG's circus revealed that even Trump's most loyal allies are fracturing, that the MAGA movement is eating itself from within, and that nobody trusts anyone anymore. And Chicago? Chicago is the warning shot. Because if a major American city can double property taxes overnight while funding safaris and luxury trips, what's stopping your city from doing the same? This isn't sustainable. This isn't responsible governance. This is the beginning of America's new tax hell, and Chicago is just the first city to burn. Here's my question for you. Do you think Chicago voters will remove their mayor, or is the damage already done? And more importantly, is your city next? Drop your answer in the comments. Hit like if this opened your eyes. Subscribe because I'm going deeper into this collapse in the next one. And share this with someone who still thinks it could never happen here, because it's already happening. See you in the next breakdown. It's not some rural outpost where this kind of thing might fly under the radar. It's a major metropolitan area, one of the fastest growing cities in the southeast. And residents woke up to what looked like a military operation happening in their neighborhoods. Think about it like this. Imagine you're driving your kid to school, and suddenly there are masked federal agents detaining people on sidewalks, outside apartment buildings, in parking lots. No explanation, no warning, just raw enforcement power on full display. And here's where it gets interesting. The official story from DHS was simple. We're targeting criminals with significant immigration violations, but the people on